A standoff in Israel over the government's plans to remove the independence of the Israeli Supreme Court and also give the government, the Prime Minister, much greater control over who gets to be a judge. This would be unprecedented, and these protests are growing even larger Thursday, with opponents for the first time in Israel's 75-year history, including elite members of the military, saying in such numbers that these changes will make Israel no longer a democracy after 75 years.
I came over to protest and demonstrate against the trial of the government, Israeli government, to cause a dictatorship on Israel. We have to fight for democracy.
I'm here with so many other Israelis to demonstrate against the so-called reform, which is threatening the Israeli democracy.
Netanyahu defending his proposed changes in Berlin on Thursday.
Ideas that are presented in Israel as though this is a break with democracy is not true. Israel will remain a liberal democracy, not different and as strong and as vibrant as it was before and as Europe is today. We are not going to deviate from that one bit.
NBC's Raf Sanchez joins me now from Tel Aviv. Raf, we've never seen crowds like this, week after week, and the military, former Mossad, former Shin Bet. This is so widespread. It's such a rejection of this hardline coalition that Netanyahu has assembled.
It really is, Andrea. It's unprecedented. The crowds we have seen here in Tel Aviv for 11 weeks in a row, turning out in their hundreds of thousands. Just to give you a sense of the proportion, 160,000 Israelis turned out in Tel Aviv here last week. Proportionate to population, that's the equivalent to 5 million Americans turning out in Manhattan. And yet, Andrea, Netanyahu shows absolutely no signs of backing down from this plan to weaken Israel's Supreme Court. He is pushing it through Parliament. It looks right now like he and his right-wing allies have the votes to get it through. And then it's very possible that at the end of that, the Supreme Court is going to strike this new legislation down. And then many people here in Israel fear we are heading for what could be a constitutional crisis. This would be an uncharted situation where the government is trying to weaken the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is saying you can't do it. And no one at this point, Andrea, really knows where it's going.
Raf Sanchez, thank you so much. And joining us now is Nadav Zafrir, the former commander of Israel's Defense Forces Elite Intelligence Unit. He's also the co-founder and managing partner at Team 8A, a venture group that focuses on cybersecurity. Thank you so much for being with us. I've never seen anything like this. I've been covering Israeli politics now for decades and decades. And it's now, including the military. You've been at some of the protests, including some people from all over Israel. Talk to me about why this time it's different.
Well, this is obviously a critical time in our history, Andrea. Our court, the independence of our court is so critical to our young democracy. We don't have the checks and balances that you have in the United States. We don't have two houses of representatives. We don't have a constitution. We don't have a federal system. And so the independence of our court is critical. In fact, our democracy in many ways is dependent on the independence of our courts. And that's the crux of the debate that we're having in Israel right now.
What's so unusual about this is that this is not an Israeli-Palestinian dispute, and there's been a lot of violence recently and a lot of controversy, and that may have been contributed to Netanyahu getting another term and putting this coalition together. But now it's so different. What effect are the protests having on Israel's people and also the economy? Is there a brain drain? You've got the intellectual elites, including the tech sector, many people leaving.
Yeah, that's why we're concerned, right? This is indeed a homemade crisis, and we must find a way for a broad agreement and a constructive debate that will solve this crisis. Because the almost miracle of Israeli economy and our tech ecosystem, which is probably second to none, the fact that we are at the epicenter of global innovation, is dependent on our institutions, is dependent on our infrastructure. We're not an island. And so the world is looking at us and our democracy, and we must make sure that our democracy remains independent.
There's a huge impact here, as you probably know, on the U.S. Jewish community. Many who have been strong supporters of Israel for years. We have Mike Bloomberg, who's helped build hospitals and schools in Israel. and criticizing Israel here. Tom Friedman writing passionate columns in the New York Times. So this has galvanized the American Jewish community across all sorts of ideological sectors.
Yeah, look, I totally understand their concern. We, the tech leaders in Israel, are also very concerned. We understand that our economy is based on the support, and at Team8, for example, we're company builders. We're tackling some of the world's toughest challenges in technology today, and we do this based on this incredible ecosystem. We have our talent density is second to none. Our courageous entrepreneurs, we're well poised to lead the global innovation, but we also need global investors to join us, and they're concerned, and I understand their concern because they're looking for stability, they're looking for continuity.
And Nadav, one of the issues here is also, what happens with Netanyahu, what happens with the future of Israel. Israel's been a democracy for so long, but here you've got the president. Usually the president of Israel is a titular figure, President Herzog. He's been trying to broker a compromise here. And this latest one has fallen apart. He's from a famous Israeli, founding Israeli family. His brother is the ambassador here in the U.S. Is there a chance that he could broker a compromise?
Look, I applaud President Herzog for his proposed outline for a resolution, what is now called the People's Resolution, and I urge our leadership, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, who, by the way, has a lot of credit to the economy, to the tech ecosystem that we built here. But this is a crucial time, and yes, I do hope that the resolution that President Herzog has introduced would be the basis. I think it's a very good basis for a reform. Look, we're not against a reform. We're against this reform, and we're protesting against the way this reform is being carried out.
Well, Nadav Zafrir, thank you so much for joining us from Tel Aviv with all of your great insights. We really appreciate it. And France's Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron is facing huge protests of his own, a crisis in government. No confidence votes from the French Parliament next week after he used special constitutional powers to push through a highly controversial change in the nation's pension plan Thursday. Violent protests erupting overnight throughout France. In the streets of Paris, protesters lighting fire to more than 9,000 tons of garbage. More than 300 arrests were made overnight. Police launched water cannons and tear gas as they tried to disperse crowds of thousands of protesters gathered at the historic Place de la Concorde. Macron's plan, raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. Macron used his constitutional powers to deny a vote in the lower house of parliament, where his party does not hold a majority. And coming up,